Mitra Stanley. I'm the gallery director here at Boston Sculptors. And tonight we are celebrating the opening of Andy Moerlein's show, Woodstone Poem. This is Andy. And also Donna Dodson's show, Amazons Among Us. And both going to give a short gallery talk. And Andy is going to start, so I'm going to give it over to him.
Hi, I'm Andy Moerlein, and welcome to Wood, Stone, Poem. I love stones. I love wood. I love the evocation of words. What you're going to see here is a whole series of work based on those three concepts. I don't necessarily write my words. I create them, and they become part of what I make. I'm a grand materialist, and I like lots of different types of materials and things to get where I'm trying to go to say what I have to say. I've been blessed with wonderful friends. Tonight, we have two of my dear friends. Michael Levin is a bonsai expert, and he's made many of the trees here in the gallery. Made a tree. Oh, isn't that a crazy concept? I don't make trees, I kill trees. Michael cultivates trees. Mary, the painter, and we'll talk about her work, similarly looks at the animate world and creates it into an object of great spiritual resonance. And that's the reason that I've invited them both to come in here, because I think that they add texture and content to what I have to say. Michael, would you like to talk about what you do? Let me hand over the microphone.
Why don't you show us one of your pieces?
Show you one of my pieces. Okay. This piece is very complex. That's why I call it complex. It's a funny piece because it's made from a single piece of wood, originally, this hat. And it was a disc of end grain of locust that someone had given me. And when I cut it open, I got this piece and the little piece over there next to Mr. Springer. Could you point at that white piece right there? Yes. So those two pieces came out of this piece of wood. It was really quite exciting. But this piece is complex for a very special reason. Could you hold this for me, Michael? I'll flip it from the other side. So that's the other view. And in fact, I like that pose better. So we're going to leave it at that pose. Oh, yes. Let's talk about another piece. This piece is kind of the centerpiece of the show, and it's really just because it stands in the center, not because it's anything special. I wanted the idea of this levitation, this lightness and risk. So there was a little bit of that put into this piece, but when I was young, they said that travel to the moon, the biggest problem with travel to outer space was water. And if they squeezed a rock, they could get water out of it, or they could extract it somehow. Well, now they've learned that they can just, like reverse osmosis and get all the water they need, just take it and drink it, and then drink it again, and then drink it again. So they don't really need the water, but the idea that rocks had water in them was really bizarre when I was a little kid. And rocks have spirit. And rocks, when you put them under pressure, not only have water, but they become diamonds. So this piece is about, can we somehow extract from a stone the intelligence to last for generations, to last longer than we're going to, if we don't somehow correct ourselves or reorient ourselves.
So you said that this is the center of the exhibition, but only literally, not that you wanted to make it really central. But is this whole thing one piece? Is this all? It looks like it goes very well. Yeah, it looks like it flows. From that painting on there, which is not all connected. So I just wanted to confirm.
It's one piece. It's one piece. No. It's one piece that's made of several pieces. So, for example, if someone wanted to just have a singular piece, I build the piece as a whole conglomerate, but I also understand that in life there's many parts to things, and if we all go together sometimes, and sometimes we stand more independently. There's a squeeze here of this extracting of the essence of a stone. Michael, please say verbosity.
I'm not used to speaking into microphones. This is a very odd invitation from Andy, and I appreciate this invitation, but to give a talk, and I wonder if Mary feels the same way, as an artist who's separated from their art. So giving a talk on bonsai, outside of my bonsai nursery, I feel like I'm separated from, what I've created. And my art is the nursery itself, isn't like an individual piece. I've created a place, an arboretum, and a park. But just like all of you who have, amazing stories as to how you got to where you are, I think it's worth telling my story because it is kind of remarkable, not ever knowing what a bonsai tree was or never even seeing a bonsai tree. You would think that I would come from some, there would be some background or training that I would need. But I just woke up one day after being a counselor for emotionally disturbed kids, making $5 an hour in a Newton halfway house, and said, I got 2 kids myself, I need to do something with my life. And I was actually selling some wholesale plants for my brother-in-law. By the way, never worked for your brother-in-law. And I wound up in New Hampshire, where there were like these little bonsai being sold at a farm stand, and it was like a lightning bolt. I said, not like a lightning bolt like I've seen the most beautiful thing in the world, but it was like, hey, I could sell these things. And I asked him where he got these trees from, and he told me about a little nursery down in New Jersey, and I immediately hopped in my Volkswagen Rabbit, spent my last $500 on some commercial wholesale trees, and started going door to door to florist shops trying to sell them. And with my samples at the end of the day, I would peddle them in Harvard Square, and I was trying to avoid Benny the cop because all the other peddlers, as you will, they all had sandwich boards and jewelry and all sorts of things that people would say, hey, here comes Benny, and they'd all be out of there, and I'd be stuck with my tatami mat filled with bonsai trees and my 6 and 8-year-old son and daughter, and we'd get busted every time. But from there, I had found out that there was a world of Japanese Americans in California, all of them old-timers who, obviously were interned during World War II, and these were people who are the forefathers of American bonsai. And I hopped on a plane, and I just had this little mimeograph sheet of these names of these nurseries where Mr. Yamasaki, Mr. Ishii, and oh God, it was just these most wonderful people who would take me into their world, and none of their kids were interested in their work. That was the most remarkable thing. Now you have to picture this. These were people in their 80s, in the 1980s, and here I was, this 30-year-old kid, wanting to learn as much as I could, and they saw this like sincerity and love in me, but none of their kids were interested. Their kids were 40-year-old Stanford graduates who wanted to go into engineering, finance, banking. These were second-generation Japanese who were embarrassed by their parents tinkering. They just, like, they would say things to me like, you like, my dad's work, or you think these are really nice trees. Now, the trees we're talking about were trees that were started in the 1950s, right after World War II, when Mr. Yamasaki, who got out of internment obviously right after World War II, they burnt his house down. His neighbors burnt his house down as his homecoming, reward. And there was a huge prejudice that we might find hard to imagine, although not so in today's climate, but huge prejudice against the Japanese even after they got out of internment. And so many of these people who became my mentors and suppliers and friends, they started what is now the California Bonsai Society, and that was started in the 1950s. And they did this not because they were great bonsai artists. They did this because it was sort of a social connectivity. These are, just like getting together in a book club, or getting together in a knitting club, or reading club, or any type of club that we might join today. They got together and did their bonsai. And one by one, they introduced me to their friends and took me around, and I wound up buying many of their trees, and in most cases, the trees that I bought were gifts, because it was just crazy. I go, Mr. Yamasaki, how much is that tree? And he would go, I don't know, what do you think? And we would negotiate prices that, I would wind up having to offer more because they wanted to give it to me for less. And the most colorful of all of these first-generation Japanese bonsai artists was Mrs. Hatanaka. Mrs. Hatanaka was one of the few women who was doing bonsai at that time. And to this day, there's very few women who do bonsai. And in Japan, it's mostly a man's hobby as well. But Mrs. Hatanaka was the greatest bonsai artist who's ever lived. And all these guys, I would show up, I'd go like door to door, and I'd have like a rented truck, and I would have different people's trees with me, and all these old Japanese men would like be looking at Mrs. Hatanaka's trees, and they'd know it's Mrs. Hatanaka because her signature was unmistakable. In bonsai, the proportions, like in any art form, are very important, and you have trunk to height ratios and all sorts of proportions as to where the branches should be. But so in traditional bonsai, there's a certain height to width ratio, but Mrs. Hatanaka, her trees were always wide and much wider than anything you'd see traditionally. So these old-timers would see me show up with Mrs. Hatanaka's trees, and they would never dare visit Mrs. Hatanaka because they were such vicious competitors. And they go, oh, look at that, and feel the soil, and smell the soil, and just like, oh, and Mrs. Hatanaka, they would always say, oh, Mrs. Hatanaka, she talk all the time. But they were so jealous, and I would go visit Mrs. Hatanaka, and she would make me, she would break me. She was such a good businesswoman. How much is that, Mrs. Hatanaka? She'd go, oh, I don't know, Michael-san, what do you think? And I'd go, oh, I don't know, Mrs. Hatanaka, and I'd be dying in the Los Angeles desert without any water. They wouldn't offer me any water or anything until finally I'd say $500, and Mrs. Hatanaka would whack me on the back, and she would say, okay, Michael-san, and then out would come the sushi and this little golf cart that they had from the 1950s, which was like, like it was a golf cart converted into nursery cart, and they'd fill it with sushi and food, and Ms. Hatanaka loved me, and I have such a great affection for her, and my only regret in my life of bonsai is that I never took photographs of any of these families, and I never wrote the book that would memorialize who were our great forefathers of bonsai. And what's interesting is the trees that I purchased from these families in the 1980s were all started in the 1950s. And I would think, God, how could anybody sell me a tree that's 35 years old at that time, not knowing that I would still have these trees like Shin knows with his business as well. And I'd love to hear your story someday. That I would have these trees for another 40 years. Who could imagine that? And who could imagine that in 40 years from now, somebody will be talking about this Michael Levin from Littleton, who bought these trees from the old timers in California, and that 40 more years will go by, and that I'll only be a memory, and that my trees will, and not just my trees, but these trees have a spirit of their own and a life force of their own that will go on and outlast me. And this idea of passing trees down from generation to generation, when you're young, that's such a sort of Japanesey mystique of a thing, you know? It's like you think, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. The Japanese pass their trees now from generation to generation because they have trees that have been passed down for 5 generations. In this country, I'm talking about trees that have only been passed down from the first generation to me as the second generation. And when I sell you a tree, you're the 3rd generation to purchase this tree. But to think that this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you reach a certain age and you realize this isn't unusual at all. Like, we're going to be passing everything down at some point, including, you know, your living room couch. So this idea of passing trees down is not unusual. However, what is unusual is that these trees are living, that they're dependent completely on you to keep them alive. Andy asked me a question of how bonsai compares to other art forms. Do you want me to wait before I answer that? Because I never think of, to a fault, I don't really think of myself as an artist. It turns out I am, but I don't think of myself as one. And I think of myself more as a custodian of these trees and a curator of this amazing garden and a person who is connected to my trees, you know, but I don't think of myself specifically as an artist. And although I can tell you that, you know, bonsai is the greatest art form the world has ever seen, you know, why would you take my word for that? But I was thinking, I wasn't even necessarily going to, I actually dreaded that question, and I wasn't even going to necessarily answer it. I was going to sidestep it. But I started thinking, when Andy asked, how would you compare bonsai to other art forms, I started thinking, well, what is art? Like, if it's most similar to farming, then is farming an art? You know, why is it that art is, you know, sort of, you know, restricted to, you know, what we think of as art in a gallery? But then I started thinking, well, of course, it's much more like sculpture than any other art form, in that you start with a big tree and you sort of, well, you can start with a little tree and grow it, but you're always taking away, you're always creating something from something that is bigger. But then I started realizing that, hey, but how could you compare this to sculpture? Because branches die. These trees live for generations, and the trees that I bought from Mr. and Mrs. Hatanaka, where I've lost the whole lower limb and I've carved them into only little memories of where those branches used to be, it would be, it would be like all of a sudden, you know, this sculpture falling off the shelf and breaking and then still displaying it. So it's more like sculpture, except that it's so much more because it's so seasonal, and that your responsibility as the caretaker is keeping this thing, this bloody thing alive. So it's more like sculpture than any other art form. However, I see it like dance, and I also see it like music. And when I look at my garden, I don't look at my individual sculptures, individual trees, as beings. They're just little beings. But I wonder, even in a gallery like this, if we're trained to look at the individual work or the whole display of trees as a symphony of performance. And so when I look at my trees, they're performing for me, and they're either dancing or singing, And sometimes they don't want to be looked at all, and they're just invisible, and they're just kind of hiding in the corner. So I wanted to share that with you. I want to hand the mic back to Mary, and if there's time at some point, I can talk to you a little bit about the few trees that I did bring here for the exhibit as well.
Thank you, Michael. I guess I can create a little segue there. I'm Mary Graham, and I met Michael because I've been growing bonsai for about 25 years. How's that? Better? Okay. And I've been an admirer of bonsai since I was maybe 10 or 12 years old when I saw them at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And of course, being in New York, I couldn't grow them myself, so it was all about books and photographs of bonsai. And then when I finally had a house and a garden of my own, I started to grow them. And I just love them. I don't know, I've been attracted to bonsai from a very early age and have grown them continuously. Yeah, so I'm a painter, and I did the painting there on the wall back there when Andy invited me to do a painting for this show. Andy and I did a show together maybe two and a half years ago that was called Absence and Presence, and that my work is really involved with absence and presence in terms of the two different directions that you can take with a landscape painting. And one being one of presence, where things are very clearly defined in the painting, sort of the Western tradition, although there's also a tradition in China of the same sort of very specific representations of landscape. And then the absence represents the emptiness, the absence, the Tao, the Qi, the mist and fog and cloud, which is an aspect of painting that attracts me very much. So the painting that I did for this show, specifically, I used a stone as the background. It looks like a mountain range behind the trees, but it's actually a painting of a piece of marble. These were admired in stone appreciation in China, sometimes called Dali dreamstones, and they are slices of marble that have very specific and beautiful grain patterns in them. And they've been part of Chinese stone appreciation since way back, Tang Dynasty, actually. And so I did some research. I saw them in China and was absolutely captivated by how they suggested mountain ranges with mist and fog, and they also are very evocative of Chinese ink paintings. So that was the inspiration for this particular painting. And then in the foreground, I live in New Hampshire. I hike. I love the mountains, particularly the higher elevations, and particularly the black spruce and firs and beautiful pines that live on the sides of the mountain slopes. And so that was a big inspiration for me in terms of bonsai as well. I love to study the trees and how they have been affected by wind and weather and circumstances and some very harsh conditions, which shapes them and creates beautiful forms with them, which to me are very evocative of bonsai also. And I have a small bonsai collection, but I'm particularly attracted to the yamadori, which are the wild collected trees, and the what's known as the bunjin, which are there's a good example right behind Michael that he just worked on for me. That's a bunjin black pine, where it's a singular trunk which has a very beautiful line to it, much like some of Andy's sculptures, you might notice. But it's a living thing, and it has, it will change and grow throughout time, which to me is one of the things that really I think is very special about bonsai, and that they're not static, and that is also something that I feel is important in any art. My art changes, Andy's art changes, and the bonsai change in time. It's an interactive collaboration with nature. So I go up in the mountains, I sketch trees, I draw them, I paint them, and to me it's all one thing. I really enjoy and appreciate the particularly silhouetted trees, very much like bonsai. So I'm looking in nature for beautiful forms as well, such as this one. This might get in a painting someday, who knows? But so I don't know, is there anything more to say? I'll maybe hand it back to you, Andy, and you can tell us more about your work.
I think we've talked enough. Thank you very much. Concurrently with my solo show here at Boston Sculptors Gallery at 486 Harrison Avenue in Boston, Massachusetts, Donna Dodson has a show. Donna Dodson is someone I've admired for a very long time, and I will continue to admire, I think, the rest of my life.
Thank you for that introduction. So we're going to go around the corner and look at Amazon's Among Us, my solo show, and not really a solo show because I have lots of collaborators in this show. And two of our guest artists are here tonight, Cledia Spear and Trina Baker. So I'll let everyone kind of get over here and settle. Feel free to drag your chair with you and get comfortable. Oh yeah. And so this show is called Amazon's Among Us. I had the idea of recasting the Dirge Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse Amazon warriors. Kind of thinking about, they were sort of these allegorical figures representing, death, famine, war, and disease. And I felt like, I was even thinking of this before this year, but especially during this year of COVID and election and all the racial tensions and environmental issues, that I felt like we needed these heroines this year. And so I made them. I carve pretty much from log. My sculptures, you can watch, there's a time lapse on the wall back here of one of the sculptures, literally going from log to a sculpture. So you can see the process. Also, in this show, I have invited Trina Baker and Cledia Spiro, and also Melchior Hall has written responsive poems to 4 of my sculptures. So this is a really group effort. And it's important to me to create a community around my work. And so I'm going to invite Trina Baker. How about your work, or about collaborating? So I want to talk, I guess, a little bit on an animator. And so these are my drawings and animation of Donna's alpha female. And the animation comes up after the time lapse. So, but with the drawings, what I do when I animate is I will perform the animation, or perform the action first in order to get the idea of where the weight is, and then I draw my video of me. So these are my drawings of me spinning around. The animations, when Donna said that it's Amazon's Among Us, the first Amazon I thought of was Wonder Woman, who, when I was a kid, was really inspiring to me. I thought, this is exactly, I want to grow up and I want to be that person that's going to be strong and strong-willed and go do things and do the right thing and do better for this world. And it was between the Amazons and my other big role models were Charlie's Angels. So this was an excellent opportunity for me. So thank you so much. Oh, the words in the background come from the poems and the meaning for the Athena symbol, the tattoo on her leg. So. Thank you. Peter, do you want to talk about your work a little bit? Okay, great.
Part of me wants to sit on my sculpture, so I think I will. So thank you, Donna. I cannot thank you and Trina and Melchior enough for being part of the show. I agree, it's been such an incredible opportunity to collaborate once again with Donna, but also with these other incredible artists that our paths would have never crossed otherwise. And it's just so amazing to hear your story, Trina, and the words of Melchior have really touched me. When Donna first approached me about this work, she mentioned Amazons, and I immediately knew exactly what I was going to base this work on. I didn't even have to think about saying yes to the show, because Xena, the warrior princess, actually had a big impact on my life. I just like used to watch it as a kid all the time, and I think just subconsciously it made me want to, repurpose the meaning of a superhero, especially in contemporary society, because I often think that we are put in these boxes as women of what we're supposed to be and all the categories that we're supposed to satisfy, including, for instance, like motherhood and now being like a successful, entrepreneur or a successful, professional, and this like these sorts of so we have to fit these molds, and I think that there's like we've gone pretty far with feminism, and I think we can go a lot further. And that's what this work is really about, is, this wearable sculpture is called Can Women Really Be Superheroes? And it's sort of like an ode to the past superheroes of how we understand them and Amazon's in actual historical reality and today's world. And I think that often these expectations of ourselves, we put that weight on ourselves. So being able to liberate ourselves takes a lot of unpeeling of who we are. And that's what like the video is called, No More Nice Guy. And there's actually original music composed by Oli. She's out in California. So there's headphones in this box, and you can listen to the audio, which is what the video is composed to. And in addition, there's video inside this metal crate that's supposed to be kind of like a well, and they're a 2-channel video, so they are timed together. And so hopefully we'll get to the part where I'm finally letting go of the chains, and they're dropping in the water, and you'll see like my reflection from underneath actually dropping this weight. And again, like the metaphor that sometimes we have this weight that we really can take it upon ourselves to take off, but just seems impossible. But it's not, and I think that, again, like there's work to be done, but I think that we've come a long way. And even with, for instance, like women and equal pay, those things I think are still an important part of the discussion. And actually, Oli, the lyrics to the song, she mentions somewhere, like, regarding all of these issues with women. So if you have a chance, like, please listen to the lyrics, because they're a really important part of this piece. And like, this is really meant for you to like spend time with it. You can put your hands on it, just so you know in the future it's not like a box that you can't. It's meant to house this video. This piece is sort of like I call it like one of my paintbrushes. I used to like oil painting was my first language, if you will. And it comes a lot into my work, and it's going to be a part of both my performances for this show. One is called I Should Have Stuck to Ballet. It's this Friday at 8 p.m. with Janelle Gilchrist and her dance troupe, which is ballet dancers. So you'll have to see, basically it will be dancing to this song, but also me trying to Olympic lift the ballet dancers. And then She's a Beast will be June 4th at 8 p.m. But like this particular one coming up, I think is going to be a really important one that kind of ties everything together for all of our work, including the poetry of Melchior. Yeah, and I hope you guys can kind of immerse yourself in this, because the sound is, maybe we can turn it up. We have it on speakers as well. And that's it. Yeah, thank you, Donna, again, for having me part of the show. It's amazing to always.
Thank you, sweetie, and thank you. Now, I think we'll just stop there, since we'll allow people to ask us questions, talk to each other, and just thank you so much for coming tonight to get a preview of what's at Boston Sculptors right now. Thanks.